Hi, thank you. How's my mic? Good? Good? Okay, I don't have fancy slides. It's hard to have slides around nuclear risk and setting a clock. I'm delighted to be here. These are the best kinds of forum. You all have given up your day to just think about big thoughts, and I'm delighted and honored to be here with you today. So Letha asked me to talk about the doomsday clock, why it's important, a little bit how we set it, and hopefully there'll be time to talk about where we're currently sitting in our news and what's happening in Ukraine and what that means for security. So let me just start by saying the doomsday clock is set at 100 seconds to midnight, with midnight being the apocalypse, the end of life on Earth as we know it. The 100 seconds is the closest we've ever set it. We set it there in 2020, and it's held there. And it, I think, signifies and symbolizes what we're all feeling. We're living in dangerous times. There is something very uncomfortable and scary about this world that we're in. And so, how do we get there? Why does this time matter? Let's just spend a few minutes on the history of it. The doomsday clock was created by an artist. This is an art piece. The clock has been called the most important graphic representation of the 20th century because of its simplicity. It's crude, right? Its minutes are just crude representations of vast bodies of thought and deliberation about the advancement of science. And to take a little detour, as we think about the advancement of science, what my organization wants us all to think about is science is going to bring us great changes. It's going to help us reduce poverty, help us advance healthcare. It is going to has the potential to make life better for all of us. We were created by scientists who believed in that vision. But they also knew that science has an underbelly. Technology can be used for danger and ill. And it's up to us and our policymakers to help ensure that we manage the risks of science's advancement so we can harness the beauty and positivity that it promises. And so those scientists began working on a very new technology, which was nuclear technology. And what they knew, and it remains the poster child for dual-use capabilities and where we're going with huge consequences and moving very fast. So back then in the day, in 1945, what they could see of the promise of the technology was that it had the potential to electrify the planet in a cleaner way than fossil fuels. What they couldn't yet see, but the promise, it could power spaceships to Jupiter. It could help us cure cancer. That was the promise. The risks, we are talking about them today because we haven't managed them. It has the potential to end life on Earth as we know it. It has the potential to destroy whole cities and to escalate further than that. So the clock is set by the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists to answer two questions. It's literally the question that opens our meetings every year. And there's two. Is humanity safer or at greater risk today than it was last year when we talked about it? And is humanity safer or at greater risk today compared to the 75 years we've been asking this question? Two very different questions, confounds them sometimes, but that's what we do when we set the clock. Until 2007, nuclear threat was our only thing that we were focused on. That was the only issue that threatened life on Earth as we know it. In 2007, in I would say one of the most controversial decisions my little organization has taken, they added climate change. Based on decades of work that we had been publishing on to say, this has the potential to end life on Earth as we know it. Two very different topics with very different timescales, but it forced a conversation over years to say, what is this doomsday clock about? Is it about nuclear risk, or is it about existential threat? And if you answer it's about existential threat, which is really much of our work had been on, you have to include climate. It was very controversial at the time. We've been noted as one of the only organizations that has explicitly noted climate change as an existential threat. But that's the set of issues that we focus on. What connects those issues is man-made technologies and the consequences. And it goes back to what our founding father, our founding editor, had written about what is the point of the bulletin, which is, and it's such a gorgeous expression, but it's to manage the dangerous presence of Pandora's box of modern science. And every word in that sentence, I think, bears a little unpacking for all of us today. And then we'll flip forward to Ukraine. To managing the dangerous presence, managing it. We can do this. Managing is policy. Managing is engagement. It's across a whole variety of issues. We can manage this. Right? Managing the dangerous presence, my favorite part of that, dangerous presence, right? Christmas presents. What's more wonderful? The dangerous presence. This is where the scientists are saying there's beauty in what we can achieve, but only if we recognize there's also those dangers, because otherwise the dangers will accelerate past the beauty of it. Managing the dangerous presence of Pandora's box, right? Pandora's box, the curses that come out of it when we just rip it open, of modern science. And I love that modern, that adjective. What is modern science? They understood back in the day that everything was changing except our ability to think about it. That modern science was happening quickly and it was going to take us into whole different directions, and it had greater and greater consequences and impact. So how are we going to do that? How do we take this clock and move it back? Because that's the beauty of this symbol, this representation. It was created by an artist who was married to a Manhattan Project scientist. She understood what her husband and all their Nobel Prize-winning friends were so worried about, that no one was paying attention. She said it at 7 minutes to midnight. It would have been helpful if she had given us more time, but she said it at 7 minutes to midnight. And she says, because it was pleasing to my eye, which you can okay, but she was an artist, she knew exactly what she was doing. 7 minutes to midnight, it's close to midnight, but we still have time. We can move it back. There's urgency, we have to pay attention, but we can do it. And so we've been setting it forward and backwards. Does it have any relevance? Every year, when the bulletin sets the clock, I've never seen anything like it, it stops the news cycle. Thousands of articles across the world, all different languages. Literally, I've never seen anything like it. I've worked at think tanks my whole life. I got there, I was like, this is unbelievable. But here's why. It's because nuclear politics, climate change, some of the artificial intelligence, pandemics, the things that the bulletin publishes on daily is written about, is talked about to keep all of us out of it. You don't understand. You can't understand this. Go think about something else. It's pretty tough stuff, like nuclear science, nuclear politics. It's so tough that when we bring the board around, just to let you in behind the curtain, right? The nuclear experts can't follow fully what the climate scientists are talking about, can't fully follow what the biosecurity experts are talking about. This is tough stuff, but we have to be engaged, and yet the way it's talked about, you're not welcome. What does the clock do? It allows all of us back in. Because you can have the conversation. Do you think it's 2 minutes to midnight? Do you think it's 100 seconds to midnight? Are these guys crazy? They should set it back. Set the, daylight savings time, set it back an hour, right? Like, we get to have that conversation. Why didn't we move it forward in February of 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine and was brandishing nuclear weapons? What should go into that? Why aren't we talking about school shootings in the clock? So if you were setting the time, what would you set it at? Why would you set it there? And why haven't we done that? Should it be closer or farther? Okay, so bringing us up to the present, I do want to talk about Ukraine for a little bit, and then my minutes are probably already over. And when I said that, I meant that metaphorically, not in the doomsday clock. Okay, where are we? So people ask us regularly, what's the likelihood that nuclear weapons are going to be used? And here's the answer. Don't know, but the likelihood is greater than it was before February. So wherever you started, it's greater than that. That should be terrifying. That's the wrong direction. We have the largest land war in Europe since 1945. We have the head of a country, a nuclear country, threatening the use and saying into the cameras, this is not a bluff. We must take him seriously. So it is greater. We didn't move the clock forward in February. Why not? A little bit of good news. We actually didn't see the preparations for a nuclear response that you would expect to see if they were about to be used, although we're pretty darn close. But we didn't see things we were looking for. We also didn't want to play into psychological operations on the population of the globe. And so what we wanted to say, and it was, again, controversial, we got a lot of emails, is 100 seconds is pretty darn scary, and this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like. This is what we should expect, unless we can find ways to move it backwards. Okay, here's a little bit of hope. What are we seeing happening in Ukraine right now? If we get through this, and we have gotten through crises in the past, if we get through this, I think there's a few things that we can look at. A little uncomfortable because international politics is usually a choice between bad and worse, so I'm going to focus on the bad, and we're going to keep trying to move in that direction to get to good. But here's the thing, if we can get out of this with a nuclear power brandishing and saber-rattling their nuclear weapons, we will have learned a few things. We are seeing, in terms of diplomacy, a focus on the use of conventional responses being a deterrent to nuclear use. Conventional responses being the normal kind of tactical and operational things that you think of, tanks and airplanes. We're seeing responses in terms of cyber. There's diplomatic efforts going on, very ugly, all very ugly stuff. But if we get out of this, we will have shown that a diplomatic and conventional response can prevent the nuclear use. And if a nuclear device is exploded, and we can continue to show that, which current planning suggests is possible, that is the morsel that we need to take out of this, that conventional responses, traditional non-nuclear responses, were not used in response, either prevented the use, hopefully, or responded to it. Why does that matter? Because out of every nuclear crisis, as we've gone through, we tend to come up with new ways to build a nuclear architecture to reduce the threat. If we can show that, then maybe we can show that the nearly 4,000 nuclear weapons that the US has on hair trigger alert are not necessary. We have other means to respond. We can bring that arsenal independently down significantly, releasing the more than $1.2 trillion that we have allocated for its expansion currently. And that money can go into responding to climate change, pandemics, and the true 21st century challenges that we're facing. That would be good for the US, and it would be good for the international environment. There is so much more we can do with that money and those resources and organization. And if we can show we can get out of that independently, and that nuclear weapons are not the weapons of the strong, Russia's not strong right now. North Korea is not strong right now. If we can show that it's not a weapon of strength, but of weakness, that's when I think we can change the conversation, and that's when we can turn the doomsday clock back. Thank you very much.